Hi, Brooke. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jeffrey. Nice to see you too. I have like a surplus of enthusiasm right now. So,
Really? That's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
That's
it's great.
wonderful. What's that coming
Uh-huh.
from? Just the joy of life?
So, yeah, Mondays just really sit well for me. No, I'm going
Yeah.
to Egypt tomorrow.
Amazing. That's so amazing. I'm so excited for you.
I'm over the moon. And a lot of friends have asked me if I'm going to bring weed with me
No, you aren't.
to Egypt. No way,
You're
not to the
definitely not.
Middle East.
No, no.
However, I have heard that hash is very popular in Egypt and Morocco. So, if it comes my way.
Yeah, well, not worth talking about on a public podcast either way. So, and I have some tips for you if you need to know. Let's go into the news of the week.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Well, speaking of
please.
nations where you should not consume cannabis,
Right.
Malaysia has one of the they have some of the harshest drug laws in the world. And they actually, since 1952, their Dangerous Drugs Act, they put in place a death sentence for people who are carrying certain amounts of drugs that they deem illegal, including
Right.
cannabis,
Right.
literally in all of its forms, like CBD, hemp, all of it. They view it all the same. And so right now, there's this man whose name I will butcher. So they call him Dr. Ganja.
Right.
He is a 62-year-old Malaysian man who was selling hemp seed oil edibles,
Wow.
and is now facing the death sentence. And it's absolutely absurd and obviously disheartening. Fortunately, I had read that in Malaysia right now, there's been such public protest to the death
Hmm.
sentence because there's like 1,000 people who are on death row right now, most of them for drug related crimes. But people are obviously upset. And so there's like a temporary suspension on the death sentence, but that
Right.
doesn't mean that it won't get put back in place. It's absolutely
Yeah, that's
wild.
crazy. And there are other countries that are like that too. I think Thailand, I think there are quite a few countries that like the drug laws are just, I mean, the United States, I mean, it should be in that conversation, right? Because cannabis is a Schedule One drug, and people have spent years and years behind bars for it. So it's not the same as death sentence, obviously, but we're not innocent by any means in terms of those type of laws.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, the death sentence is more extreme, but
Yeah,
when you send someone to jail for life, you're
yeah,
kind of, that's like a de
yeah.
facto life,
Right.
taking away someone's life.
Yeah,
Yeah, really not a big fan of what's going on
yeah,
with that. But you got
yeah.
any happier news for me?
Well, no, I think there is an interesting side to this story. The guy, his name is, I don't know his first name, but Abdullah, and it's Dr.
Yeah.
Ganja. He had cancer, I guess, and found that cannabis basically cured him. So he became a conscientious objector in a very classical sense, that he posted about cannabis and really put his neck out there for cannabis. And kudos to the Vice News bureau that to write the story, because it was Vice News, it wasn't the New York Times, and they're making a big deal of it. And it seems like it's making a little bit of waves in Malaysia. What I think about for this is whether eventually cannabis gets to a point where people see it as a human right. Like you hear about countries that have draconian laws against homosexuality, and they get flack from the international community and they get pressured. And there's not that for this, but I could see in 5 or 10 years that cannabis becomes viewed by the international community as something that shouldn't be punished. And I'm wondering if this is just sort of the beginnings of like kind of international outrage at drug laws, and whether in 5 or 10 years you're gonna be a pariah country if you have these laws.
Right on. I mean, That's very hopeful, but whenever in the cannabis space, when you put the numbers on things, 5 years ago, people said, "Weed would be federally legal in the United States,"
Mm,
by now.
yeah,
And interestingly, the World Health Organization has made a public statement to the globe that
yeah,
cannabis can be used for medicinal purposes.
right,
There's nothing wrong with that. And
right.
yet, laws they're still catching up. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, it doesn't deter me from wanting to visit Malaysia, that's for sure.
yeah. Yeah, you're right about the timeline. I mean, you look at what happened with social change around gay marriage, and that seemed to happen extremely fast. But then if you were a gay person like who's 80 years old, they're like, I've been oppressed all my life. So yeah, it's tricky. I think there is a little bit of hope, but obviously for all the people that are being punished for cannabis and oppressed and suffering from lack of cannabis, it can't happen fast enough.
Yeah.
Um, so let's see. There's a recently published study by Pew to talk about social change. Here's a good segue
Talk about it.
that only 9% of Americans think cannabis should be illegal still for medical or recreational use. So that's a sea change in the United States. I mean, 91%. And I posted on this at LinkedIn, but I compared it. So that's 9%. 16% of people believe that Bigfoot is real. 25% believe that some people can move objects with their minds. And 26% believe that aliens have visited us in modern times. But I'm wondering, maybe you believe some of those things from as I get to know you. Do you think people can move things with their minds?
I was so nervous yet hopeful that you would ask.
Okay.
As you're going down the list, I'm
Yeah.
like, well, you know, Bigfoot could be real.
Yeah.
Who am I to
Okay.
say?
Okay. All right.
Certainly could be. I'm open to all of these things. The one that I'm firm on is that aliens have visited us in modern times.
You
And
believe that
certainly
for
I'm
sure.
firm on the fact that Americans or that cannabis should be legal in America. But what's so curious about those stats is even last year, I feel like the number was significantly lower. Like
Yes.
75% of
Yeah.
Americans in 2020 were okay with cannabis. And
Hmm.
I don't know if we're polling the same people or if everyone's just getting bored of this conversation and they're like, "Oh my god, just legalize it already.
Mm.
Stop stop conducting studies."
Yeah. Yeah. I think my my guess is that the more people that are open about it, the more that you know that your next door neighbor uses it or that somebody's grandmother uses it for her pain or something like it's sort of this uh it's gathering momentum and it's
Yeah.
just yeah it's kind of broken in terms of social acceptability in the states. I think that tide has turned. I think the laws are just way behind public opinion at this point. So I think that now it's up to the federal government to catch up to the public, and they're pretty far behind at this stage based on that data.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So now I just before we move on, I need to know,
Tell
do
me.
you think Bigfoot is real?
Uh, I don't think Bigfoot is real. No, I think Bigfoot is real in people's minds, but that's about as real as I think Bigfoot is.
And the other 2, moving objects with minds?
Um, no, on the
It's a hard
moving
pass.
objects with minds. I guess a maybe on the aliens. I'd give it a maybe on the aliens.
Wow, I was gonna say if we got 0 out of 3, I
We
was
have
gonna
some
be a
common
little
ground.
I was
Good,
gonna be a little upset.
good.
Triggered. And in other news,
Yep.
speaking of legislation, one thing that might help us move
Mhm.
forward on legalization,
Yeah.
always something, always looking for the golden nuggets. A light at the end of the tunnel for cannabis research. So, this is so interesting that the only place for the past 50 years that the United States has allowed to grow legal cannabis used for research, for scientific or medical purposes, is the University of Mississippi.
Right.
Like, I'm not here to rag on Mississippi,
You
but
kind of are.
I
Yeah.
am. Like, so go Ole Miss. Yes, I see you. I love it.
Right.
Roll Tide. But
I
is
don't
that
know. I have
Mississippi
no.
or
I don't
Alabama?
know. I have no idea. I think that may be Alabama, but okay.
Same, same. But in any case, somehow they have a monopoly on the ability to grow cannabis. However, recently, the DEA announced that they're in the process of registering several more companies to grow legal weed for research.
Yeah.
And the way that I see it, obviously, the more weed for research, the more research.
Yeah.
And then the more research you have, the more doctors get on board because if science speaks, then scientists and doctors and professionals have to get on board with the data. And then, finally, we can legalize.
Maybe we have some data. Yeah, I think it's not just more research. It reading the article, it seemed like much better research.
Hmm.
That there was a patient that was the cannabis anemic green powder. So imagine, and so they did a study of PTSD suffering people, and they found that nobody suffered any side effects, but they couldn't really tell any difference between people who got the treatment and the placebo. But they're really wondering whether just the weed was so weak that,
Right.
that there was no so better data. Like, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I posted something this last week to LinkedIn about the medical impact, the medical benefits of cannabis. And I got people DMing me about their own experiences with anxiety and depression. Every time I post about something like that, I get people reaching out and being like, thank you for saying that. That's me.
Mm.
But we don't really have any good data on that. And so it's all
Mhm.
anecdotes. We all believe it that, and the consumer studies, I've done studies where I've polled people and said, why do you use cannabis? And 86% will say either anxiety, depression, sleep, or pain management.
Mm.
But that's not real scientific research that a doctor can use to prescribe. So that's that's awesome that we're going to have better data.
Right. And more diversity in the crops that are grown.
Yeah.
Different strains, different cannabinoid profiles and
All that
terpene
stuff.
ratios and all of these things. What makes one person have anxiety from cannabis might relieve it for someone else. And it really could boil down to the recipe, to what are the ingredients in this
Totally.
particular plant. And that is so exciting for me that I really do believe in like a prescriptive era of cannabis. And I
Yeah.
don't necessarily see that as a negative.
Yeah. We're in a little bit of, I don't want to insult anybody, but like it's a little bit in the black magic era of like terpenes, and it's a little bit horoscopy. It's like limonene awake. You know what I mean? It's a little bit like that, and I'm sure people have been able to figure out what works for them, but it doesn't feel super scientific. And I think that getting there will be really great for a lot of people that need to address specific issues that they have.
Yeah, for sure. That's that's honestly the best comparison that you could have made. And
The
well,
horoscope.
yeah, it
Horoscoping.
offends me and it also comforts me. So
Okay. All right. All right.
speaking as a Virgo rising Virgo.
Got it. Yes. We have
How
some
about those?
differences there in terms of what we believe. I get that. It's all good. You're right. I knew that you liked the horoscope thing. It's all good. Um, Bigfoot is a Virgo too. So there's another study that came out recently, which I think is really important around the electricity uses of cannabis. Now, my news is almost always going to have some number in it. And this one is that there's an estimate. It's crazy hard to believe, but it was a real study that cannabis cultivation already uses 1% of all electricity in the United States and 4% of the electricity in Denver. So you think about the entire United States, all the things that we're manufacturing, all the chickens that we're growing and slaughtering, all the cows, all the power plants, everything, all the lights that are on,
All
all
the
the
iPhones
battery,
being
all the
charged.
iPhones being charged, and cannabis is 1%. So that's really huge. I mean, I've seen indoor cultivation, and I get it. I mean, those places are just like flooded with photons. Um, but I think it's a real issue. Because if cannabis is going to grow 10%, 10 times, 10x in the US, that's not really sustainable. It's not
Absolutely.
sustainable from a, you know, there may not even be enough electricity, but it's also from an environmental perspective, that's super tricky. And I think that the cannabis industry will really miss the boat unless this this thing is addressed. It has a lot to do with regulation, I know, but I think this is a big deal.
I completely agree. I
Yeah,
mean, not just speaking as like a hippie,
yeah,
but outdoor cultivation I know comes with its a whole bundle of difficulties, but
yeah.
greenhouse grows seem to be the sweet spot in the middle
Mm,
that enable you to monitor and moderate your environment
mm,
with a little more of a hand on it,
mm.
and also reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and your electrical usage. And again, I'm not an expert on
Yeah,
growing, but I think that within the cannabis industry, this is one of the things that disheartens me is that there's so much greenwashing even within the space where
yeah.
if you're in weed, then everything has to be good. And this to me is like, yeah, I mean, it's really, really bad, not just for people within who use cannabis, but for
Right.
everyone.
Yeah,
Um, a detriment to our planet so that you can get high. It starts to become like, how do you justify that? And my curiosity is also with the cannabis consumer. Does the average cannabis consumer care
right.
if a brand advertises and really pushes out, like, we're so green, we are outdoor, we don't use any pesticides, like, we're as holistic as you can get? Does anyone care? Will someone pay a premium for that? Or will it have to boil down to, federal regulation that says, like, no more growing inside?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, consumers don't there are some consumers that pay for environmentally sustainable practices, but in general, people don't. I think there's federal regulation, and certainly allowing interstate commerce is going to be huge. Like Maine
Hmm.
should not be trying to grow its own weed. You know what I mean? Like
Good point,
when
Jeffrey.
like Kentucky has supplied the planet with tobacco for 200 years. So like that's the place you should grow cannabis, not in Maine. Like Maine, you grow lobsters or whatever. So there's gonna need to be some interstate commerce. Um, but industries too have to regulate themselves for the long-term benefit of themselves because um, you know consumers may not care now, but eventually things can turn really bad for industries. And all of a sudden, everybody hates those industries, everybody hates those companies. It's negative perception. It's hard to get people to join the industry. So
Hmm.
it would be a shame to waste all the goodwill towards cannabis on just not getting our act together. So longer term, I think we have to face that fact.
Right on. Yeah. You should poll your LinkedIn community.
Pull it. Yeah, what
Yeah,
should I?
poll them.
All right. What's the
See,
question?
thumbs up or thumbs down. Would you pay more, or do
Oh,
you care? Do you care if a brand,
hmm.
implements environmentally savvy practices?
Yeah.
Do
Yep.
you care? Everyone's like, "No." A
Well, people
resounding
people
no.
people say they care, but whether when they actually go to the shelf. The other thing is just we're, people need to be educated about cannabis. Like if you're
Yeah.
going for just the highest THC and then you're less likely to perceive value in sun-grown cannabis that may not have as high THC but may have other components. So that's kind of a common discussion in cannabis is getting people off just that THC bandwagon, and that's
Right.
that's a bigger issue. Um, should we go to the stat of the week?
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah,
Give me
we've
some
already,
more numbers.
we've already done a lot of numbers, but I'm the numbers guy. So here's some stats from Pistil data that I pulled a couple of weeks ago about vape brands in California. Guess how many vape brands there are in California? How many would you guess?
In California?
Yeah, for sale. in California in a given week.
Like 100, 200,
488
488.
total vape brands, not products, vape brands for sale in California in a given week. Only 5 of them had more than 25% shelf space. So basically you have,
Okay.
and 405 brands, which is the vast majority, were in 3% or fewer stores. So basically, if you picture a market of 840 storefronts and you have tons and tons of brands, and most of those brands are only in a few stores.
Wow. And
Yeah.
this is legal? These are licensed?
These are licensed. Yeah, you always bring that
So
up
the
because I know there's a
unlicensed
lot of
ones.
unlicensed
Yeah.
stuff. So my friend Ben Kovacs basically said that the summary of that is that 95% of vape brands are fucked. Basically, like there's a huge amount of vape brands that have absolutely no economies of scale. They're basically struggling to survive, and there's going to be a huge wave of a consolidation coming up sometime soon because that's just not sustainable.
Right. And I'm wondering, maybe you know the answer to this.
Yeah.
All of these vape brands, do they all have their own individual manufacturers, or is it kind of like wine where like one vineyard will grow, one manufacturer is actually producing, I don't know, 100 of these different vape brands
I,
products?
you know, I think that everybody is mix and matching a lot of different stuff along the supply chain, whether it's
Hmm.
the hardware, the carts, the distillate, the terpenes, if they're adding terpenes. So yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of Lego set product design, putting things together. But but
Yum.
you end up with a situation where consumers don't see the same products over and over on the shelf. They have trouble attaching brand loyalty, and you just have an industry that's really ripe for quite a bit of disruption over the next couple of years.
Totally. And I'm trying to think of the vape brands that I do know, and I can name like
Mm,
a couple,
yeah,
really a couple, 488.
yeah, it's a lot, right?
Yeah, it's not a very lucky number.
So that's the stats of the week.
Great stat.
What is it? What is our controversy of the week?
All right, I'm ready to stoke some fires.
All right, let's go.
So
Let's go
I
for it.
want to talk about celebrities in cannabis.
Okay.
Should we listen to them? Just because a famous person slaps their face on a brand, does that help or hinder the consumer in making a smart buying decision? Um, so just a quick laundry list of
Please. All
celebrities.
right. Let's do it.
Obviously, like Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa. You've got Drake, who's now in the business, Montel, Jim Belushi, Cheech and Chong, both Cheech and Chong, Santana and his son, Bella Thorne, Martha Stewart, Kristen Bell. You have Shavo. The list goes on and on
Yeah.
and on.
It's kind of a mixed bag of celebrities too, isn't it? To
It
be
really
honest.
is a ragtag crew. It truly is. From Martha Stewart
Yeah.
to Drake.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are different levels for sure. So what do you
And
think about that?
well, the most prime example to me right now is Seth Rogen,
Mhm.
who his brand Houseplant. I actually haven't tried the cannabis yet. I've heard great things. No shame, no shade. They launched in Canada first, then they launched in California. They're looking to expand. They sold out in California within like I think it was 3 hours of releasing their
Yeah.
products. 3 hours, their first launch day. And it was very expensive,
Mm.
very, very expensive cannabis. I don't know how one can judge that it's necessarily of that much of a better quality than the next best thing available at your dispensary. Obviously, you're paying more because it's Seth Rogen and you want to be a
Mhm.
part of this celebrity community. And there is the endorsement factor that makes you think a product is better. But when it comes to cannabis, I don't think that's the case. It's a
You don't think
plant.
Martha Stewart's weed is better than
I simply do not. I
yeah.
certainly don't think Bella Thorne's cannabis.
I don't
I
even know
don't
who
think she
Bella
was
Thorne
sitting
is.
there. Oh my gosh, Jeffrey,
Yeah, I
hide
know.
your wife, hide your kids.
I didn't recognize half the people on your list. Um, so you don't think you actually wouldn't buy cannabis because of a celebrity endorsement compared to the control group of non-cannabis endorsed c celebrity endorsed cannabis.
Yeah, and that goes beyond cannabis as well. Just because Snoop Dogg's drinking Coronas, I also don't want a Corona.
Yeah.
You know, I think that no matter what product someone is trying to push, there needs to be a certain level of authenticity, at
Mm,
least for me, to want to jump on that bandwagon. And I do think that when it comes to creating cannabis products, gauging authenticity is actually a lot easier because it boils down to were you with do you use the product? Were you there along the way while it was being created? Was Kristen Bell in the facility while, the extractors were pulling CBD out like,
right,
and
right.
putting it into her face lotions and bath bombs?
Mm,
Sincerely doubt it. Maybe she helped pick out, the nice cherry bomb smells that went along with her line.
right, right.
Um, but yeah, there's definitely some people I buy it and I dig it and I appreciate that they're slapping their face on something in the cannabis space and they're willing to use their celebrity to say, I support this cause. And some people, it's just so evident that it's dollar signs. And
Mm,
that starts to break my heart a little bit.
yeah. Well, consumers are super savvy now. I don't think you can trick them. I don't think you can just throw a I mean, people know an 11-year-old knows how celebrity endorsement works, right? Especially, I mean, yeah, in this age of influencers and all of that, they can tell the difference. I think that brands are just really trying. It's like such an easy way out. You get an investment and you buy some sort of celebrity endorsement, and you think that's the path. Um, and I don't think that works. I mean, it didn't work for Marley Natural. It doesn't seem to be working very
Hmm.
well. Um, I've seen a lot of that come and go in California over just the last couple of years. I think people in cannabis forget what really works from a brand perspective. Like brands, I think certain types of products, there's a social proof orient. Like you have a bag, like I don't know, what's a fancy bag? A Birkin bag? Is that a fancy bag?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you walk around with that and people are like, okay, that person's rich or that person, that's like social proof to it. But most brands operate on I know that this is a quality thing. And
Mhm.
for cannabis, people need to understand that there's quality and there's value associated with it. I think when you put a celebrity brand on it, you almost assume the opposite as a consumer, that this thing is sort of like extra expensive for no reason. And I think you're right. Like you're not going to assume that it's a higher quality. And it's really hard for consumers in this space right now to understand what's quality and what's not. And that's why they go for price and THC.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think a lot of these cannabis celebrity endorsements are, you know, useless. Yeah.
What about for CBD products though? Because, if a CBD product can be carried at CVS or Ralph's or whatever grocery store you live in, and you're a grandma or you're, a
Yeah.
middle-aged woman and you're curious, do you think that specific avenue would
Yeah,
entice more
probably like
people?
this is safe because, I don't
Martha.
know. Yeah, Judge Judy uses it. So therefore, like, she wouldn't lie to me. Yeah, I think there's probably something like that. And I think Seth Rogen is kind of the exception that proves the rule because it's obvious in his PR anyway that he's somebody who really relies on cannabis to get himself like functioning in the world.
Mhm.
He's a highly functioning person. He obviously loves cannabis, and he also has kind of put his image forward as this sort of craftsman because he does ceramics. And so I think he has a little bit of momentum from that. Like there is some authenticity, and he can garner a lot of press attention. But if he can't put out a quality product at a really good price and get good enough distribution so that people can be loyal to that brand over time, I don't think there's any way that that brand is going to do better than Pacific Stone or Old Pal or something else that has a good value to price ratio.
Yeah, the Jay-Z Monogram cannabis.
Yeah,
They
come
have
on.
a $40 pre-roll. I
Yeah,
think it's
that's
40 or $50
yeah.
for one pre-roll.
And maybe in a niche, like maybe if you're in a Las Vegas nightclub or something, like I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I've never been in a Las Vegas nightclub, but you know, maybe
Oh, sure you
well,
haven't.
okay. Not recently anyway. But yeah, maybe there's a little bit of value to that super hype, the hype brand. There's definitely some people that like hype brands and maybe related to cannabis, there's a little bit of a market there. But the fact is, almost every different type of person uses cannabis. It's a massively consumed um, product with most people in this world are really price sensitive because they only have a limited amount of dollars and they're going to go for value and price.
Yeah. Well said.
Okay,
Now, could we close out with
please.
I've got one final question for you.
Okay.
If there was one celebrity that got
Mm.
involved in the cannabis space, who would sway you to smoke their weed?
Who would sway me? That's a good one. Smoke their weed. Hmm. I'm trying to think. I'm
I
trying to
love that
think.
it's turning the gears.
Yeah, maybe someone like Noam Chomsky. You ever heard of Noam Chomsky?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think Noam Chomsky. If Noam Chomsky was I've been smoking this stuff since I was 20 and I'm 90 and I've been pumping out not only brilliant Nobel Prize winning scholarship, but I've been deeply committed to social justice and fighting every fucking day of my life. And this is the weed that did it. Yeah, 100%. I would definitely pay an extra couple dollars for that.
Excellent answer. Wow, that really summarizes you as well.
I'll ask you next time on the next podcast, Brooke.
Okay, sounds
So
good.
be
I'll have some
ready.
time to think. I
Okay.
will. I will.
All right. See you later.